Lady War Road, where the bridge is. Once at top of a park called Hillyfields. Basically, live on the road that joins onto the park. So she walk over the park, down the hill, man's yard. Lewisham. Lewisham is home for me. The whole of Lewisham, I'm comfy everywhere. But Lady War, I did a lot of finding myself.
What is up, everyone? Welcome in. Ooh, sorry. What's up? We got DV8 and Bishonen in a box, both in chat. Hell yeah. It's good to see you guys. Happy President's Day? Was too loud, too loud? Here, hold on. Oh, we got blurry camera. Okay, hold on. Let me switch to the... There we go. Come on. No, I had to lower my volume. Sorry. Oh, I see. My fucking mic is really high. That's why. Okay. There we go. I think the... We got a deep fried stream. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry, Deviate. Okay. Let me say good morning. Welcome in, everyone. It is Monday, February 16th, right? It is Monday. Yeah, it's Monday. February 16th, it is President's Day, and we got a pretty good stream lined up today. We're going to be talking about the 2028 election because people are already freaking out about that. We're going to be watching Hassan talk about voting third party and how people freaked out about that. And then later on, we got, we're going to be watching an interview one of my professors did. And that is her. She's like a national political party, public opinion expert and stuff. And so she did an interview talking about the 28 election as well. So it'll be a good stream today. There we go. Okay. All right. So, let's start off with some reading, because I realize that reading is the new meta now. Oh dang! Stardust City Hag is reporting for mod duty. How did you get your like little name to be blue? Is it just because you're a mod? Hold on. There we go. Okay, I made Bishonen in a box, a moderator. Better meta than whatever Warzone has, yeah. Bishonen in a box, type something in chat so we can see if you have mod colors or not. I don't play Warzone, yeah. Oh, there we go. Okay. All right. Should we make DV8 a mod too? No, not yet. Maybe. Maybe that's something we could we could have a goal. If we get 100 subscribers, that's when DV8 becomes a mod. Instead of like the streamer being like, okay, when I get 100 subscribers, I'll bleach my hair or whatever. We vet all the mods. Okay. Let's get into reading because I am super excited. I got hold on, let me go full screen again real quick. I got this book is from an author that I've had to read a lot of his stuff for class, Mr. Ace Mongol. I don't know how to say his name. But anyways, I got this book because I think I read some bits of it for class. And also I really like the way this dude writes. I think it is such a like, I don't know, they just seem smart. Like they got Nobel Peace Prize, you can see right there. Whatever, you can't see it, but anyways, this book has been amazing. I already read the first chapter by myself, and then I went to go see if other people. Thank you, Bashona in the box. What book are you currently reading? They seem smart. 10 out of 10. So anyways, they're like economist or something, but I wanted to read the first chapter on stream because it's good and we are all about education on stream. So let's see. Reading my games, Marcella said. I mean, Bashona in a box. Whoops. all right. So, hold on. Stardust said, currently reading Parable of the Sower. Sower. Sorry. That's pretty cool. Doxed? No, not doxed. Nobody's doxed here. Okay. Hold on, let me just make sure the stream is healthy. Okay. All right. So, stream looks good. Let me switch that to live and switch this to that. Okay, whatever. Okay. All right. So anyways, this book is titled Why Nations Fail by Darren Ace Mongol. Ace Mongol and James A. Robinson. Sorry. I just found out that Ace Mongol is a Turkish person, and I want to say that I graduated from one Turkish educator to another Turkish educator. Darren, yeah. So, big praise for Turkey. Excuse me. All right. So this book was written or published in 2012, so it's kind of old, but it is so relevant. So let's get to the first chapter. We can click. Oh hell yeah. Whoops, that was not the first chapter. There we go. So okay, the chapter links don't actually work. Okay. We don't need to read the preface. Preface is boring. There we go. Okay. Chapter 1. So close and yet so different. The economics of the Rio Grande. That is the river, I guess. All right. The city of Nogales is cut in half by a fence. Here, let me zoom in just a little bit more. The city of Nogales is cut in half by a fence. If you stand by it and look north, you'll see Nogales, Arizona, located in Santa Cruz County. The income of the average household there is $30,000 a year. Most teenagers are in school, and the majority of adults are in high school, or majority of adults are high school graduates. Despite all the arguments people make about how deficient the U.S. Healthcare system is, the population is relatively healthy. With high life expectancy by global standards, many of the residents are above age 65 and have access to Medicare. It's just one of the many services that the government provides that most take for granted, such as electricity, telephones, and sewage systems, public health, and road networks linking them to other cities in the area and to the rest of the United States. And, last but not least, law and order. The people of Nogales, Arizona can go about their daily activities without fear for life or safety, and not constantly afraid of theft, expropriation, or other things that might jeopardize their investments in their business and houses. Equally important, the residents of Nogales, Arizona take it for granted that, with all its efficiency and occasional corruption, the government is their agent. They can vote to replace their mayor, congressman, and senator. They vote in presidential elections that determine who will lead their country. Democracy is second nature to them. Life south of the fence, just a few feet away, is rather different. While the residents of Nogales, Sonora, live in a relatively prosperous part of Mexico, the income of the average household there is about 1/3 that of Nogales, Arizona. Most adults in Nogales, Sonora do not have a high school degree, and many teenagers are not in school. Mothers have to worry about high rates of infant mortality. Poor public health conditions mean it's no surprise that the residents of Nogales, Sonora do not live as long as their northern neighbors. They also don't have access to many public amenities. Roads are in bad condition south of the fence. Law and order is in worse condition. Crime is high, and opening a business is a risky activity. Not only do you risk robbery, but getting all the permissions and greasing all of the palms just to open is no easy endeavor. Residents of Nogales, Sonora live with politicians' corruption and ineptitude every day. In contrast to their northern neighbors, democracy is a very recent experience for them. Until the political reforms of 2000, Nogales, Sonora, just like the rest of Mexico, was under corrupt control of the Institutional Revolutionary Party, or the Partido Revolucionario Institucional. Yeah, hell yeah. Or as we call it, the PRI. Just go with PRI because goddamn, Mexico has so many stupid 3-letter acronyms for their parties. There's the there's the PON, and then there's the PRD, or there's just too many. Okay, but anyways, the is the longest lasting party. Maybe I don't know. Whatever. In this case, in 2000, the was in charge. How could the two halves of what is essentially the same city be so different? There is no difference in geography, climate, or the types of disease prevalent in the area, since germs do not face any restrictions crossing back and forth between the United States and Mexico. Of course, health conditions are very different, but this has nothing to do with the disease environment. It is because people south of the border live with inferior sanitary conditions and lack decent health care. But perhaps the residents are very different. Could it be that the residents of Nogales, Arizona are grandchildren of migrants from Europe, with those in the south, while those in the south are descendants of Aztecs? Not so quite. The background of people on both sides of the border are quite similar. After Mexico became independent from Spain in 1821, the area around Los Dos Nogales was part of the Mexican state of Vieja, California, and remained so even after the Mexican-American War of 1846 through 48. Indeed, it was only after the Grand Sin Purchase of 1853 that the U.S. border was extended into this area. It was Lieutenant N. Meikler, who, while serving the border, noted the presence of the pretty little valley of Nogales. Here, on either side of the border, two cities rose up: the inhabitants of Nogales, Arizona, and Nogales, Sonora. Share ancestors, enjoy the same food and the same music, and we would hazard to say have the same quote unquote culture. Of course, there is a very simple and obvious explanation for the differences between the two halves of Nogales that you've probably long since guessed. The very border that defines the two halves. Nogales, Arizona, in the United States, its inhabitants have access to economic institutions of the United States, which enable them to choose their occupations freely, acquire schooling and skills, and encourage their employers to invest in the best technology, which leads to higher wages for them. They also have access to political institutions that allow them to take part in the democratic process, to elect their representatives and replace them if they misbehave. In consequence, politicians provide the basic services ranging from public health to roads to law and order that citizens demand. Those of Nogales, Sonora are not so lucky. They live in a different world shaped by different institutions. These different institutions create very desperate incentives for the inhabitants of the two Nogaleses and for the entrepreneurs and businesses willing to invest there. These incentives created by different institutions of the Nogaleses and the countries in which they are both situated are the main reason for the differences in economic prosperity on the two sides of the border. Why are the institutions of the United States so much more conductive of economic success than those of Mexico or, for that matter, the rest of Latin America? The answer to this question lies in the way the different societies formed during the early colonial period. The institutional divergence took place then, with implications lasting into the present day. To understand this divergence, we must begin right at the foundation of the colonies in North and Latin America. Pretty good freaking intro, right? So good, so good. Comparing two cities and how vastly different they are economically, socially, culturally. Well, no, they said that they had the same culture, but you know how vastly different they are, even though they just like are the same city essentially, and a fence separates them. Yeah, thank you, DV8. That intro was fire. All right, so let's get into this next good part. Next section of chapter 1 is called the founding of Buenos Aires. Early in 1516, so far back, not even the United States wasn't even around yet. Early in 1516, Spanish navigator Juan Diaz de Solis sailed into wide estuary. I think wide estuary, whatever, we're not going to look up that word, on the eastern seaboard of South America. Wading ashore, de Solis claimed the land for Spain, naming the river the Rio de la Plata, River of Silver, since the local people possessed silver. The indigenous people on either side of the estuary, the Churas in what is now Uruguay, and the Querandí in the plains that were known as the Pampas in modern Argentina, regarded the newcomers with hostility. These locals were hunter-gatherers who lived in small groups without strong centralized political authorities. Indeed, it was such a band of the charuras, I don't know, sorry, who charuras. I'm trying to do my tongue in ways that it cannot go yet. I'm sorry. uh, who clubbed De Solis to death as he explored the new domains as he attempted to occupy for Spain. In 1534, the Spanish, still optimistic, sent out a first mission of settlers from Spain under the leadership of Pedro de Mendoza. They founded a town on the site of Buenos Aires in the same year. It should have been an ideal place for Europeans. Buenos Aires literally means good airs, had a hospitable temperature climate, yet the first stay of the Spaniards there was short-lived. They were not after good airs, but resources to extract and labor to coerce. The Charuras and the Querandí were not obliging, however. They refused to provide food for the Spaniards and refused to work when caught. They attacked the new settlement with their bows and arrows. The Spaniards grew hungry since they had not anticipated having to provide food for themselves. Buenos Aires was not what they had dreamed of. The local people could not be forced into providing labor. The area had no silver or gold to exploit, and the silver that De Solis found had actually come all the way from the Inca state in the Andes, far to the west. The Spaniards, while trying to survive, started sending out expeditions to find a new place that would offer greater riches and populations easier to coerce. In 1537, one of these expeditions, under the leadership of Juan de Ayolas, penetrated up the Paraná River, searching for the route of the Incas. On its way, it made contact with the Guarani, a sedentary people with agricultural economy based on maize and cassava. De Ayola immediately realized that the Guarani were a completely different proposition from the Charuras and the Querandí. After a brief conflict, the Spanish overcame Guarani resistance and founded a town, Nuestra Señora de Santa María de la Asunción. Oh my God. Bashona in a box said the R's in Spanish are too hard for me too. Yeah, I know. Whew, we're going. We're going. So I'm sorry. I have to shout out my abuela. She's actually Guarani. She grew up in like a Guarani area, and then was her mother was captured, I guess, by a Spaniard, and the rest is history. That's crazy. It blew my mind so much because I know my abuela had she's from Buenos Aires, right? She's Argentinian. She basically calls herself the Europe of South America, the Europe of Latin America. And it's like, damn, Guarani were literally there fighting in the way that I swear to God, like how some Americans be acting like the native North Americans be fighting, the Spanish Indian War, the American Indian War, but like there was a whole other indigenous people in Latin America and South America going through the same thing. And as we go through the rest of this chapter, you guys will see how crazy it unfolds. Okay. So anyways, Guarani put up a fight, but still Spanish won because, guns versus bow and arrows, essentially. And then this new town, I'm not going to say it again, is the capital of Paraguay today. The conquistadors married Guarani princesses and quickly set themselves up as a new aristocracy. They adapted the existing system of forced labor and tribute of the Guarani with themselves at the helm. This was the kind of colony they wanted to set up, and within 4 years, Buenos Aires was abandoned as all the Spaniards who settled there moved to the new town in Paraguay. Buenos Aires, the Paris of South America, quote unquote, a city of wide European style boulevards based on the great agricultural wealth of the Pampas, was not resettled until 1580. Whoa, what was it? This was like 1537. Yeah. So 40 years later, or almost. Yeah, 40 years later. Not resettled until 1580. The abandonment of Buenos Aires and the conquest of the Guarani reveals the logic of European colonization of the Americas. Early Spanish, and as well as we see, and as we will see, English colonists were not interested in tilling the soil themselves. They wanted others to do it for them, and they wanted riches, gold, and silver to plunder. Okay. Next section from Caja Maraca. I don't know how to say that. The expeditions of de Solis de Mendoza and de Ayolas came in wake of more famous ones that followed Christopher Columbus's sightings of one of the islands of the Bahamas in October 12, 1492. Spanish expansion and colonization of the Americas began in earnest with the invasion of Mexico by Hernán Cortés in 1519. The expedition of Francisco Pizarro. The expedition of Francisco Pizarro to Peru a decade and a half later, and the expedition of Pedro de Mendoza to the Rio de la Plata just 2 years after that. Over the next century, Spain conquered and colonized most of Central, Western, and Southern South America, while Portugal claimed Brazil to the east. The Spanish strategy of colonization was highly effective. First perfected by Cortés in Mexico, it was based on the observation that the best way for the Spanish to subdue opposition was to capture the indigenous leaders. This strategy enabled the Spanish to claim accumulated wealth of the leader and coerce the indigenous people to give tribute and food. The next step was setting themselves up as the new elite of the indigenous society and taking control of the existing methods of taxation, tribute, and particularly forced labor. When Cortés and his men arrived at the great Aztec capital of Tenochtitlan on November 8th, 1519, they were welcomed by Montezuma, the Aztec emperor, who had decided, in the face of much advice from his counselors, to welcome the Spaniards peacefully. What happened next is well described by the account compiled after 1545 by the Franciscan priest Franciscan priest Bernardino de Sahagún in his famous Florentine codices. All right, so here's the quote. At once, the Spanish firmly seized Montezuma. They then each of the guns shot off. Fear prevailed. It was as if everyone had swallowed his heart. Even before it had grown dark, there was terror, there was astonishment, there was apprehension, there was a stunning of the people. And when it dawned, thereupon were proclaimed all things which the Spaniards required: white tortillas, roasted turkey hens, eggs, fresh water, wood, firewood, charcoal. This had Montezuma indeed commanded. And when the Spaniards were all settled, they thereupon inquired of Montezuma as to all the city's treasure. With great zeal they sought gold, and Montezuma thereupon went leading the Spaniards. They were surrounding him, each holding him, each grasping him. And when they reached the storehouse and a place called Teocalco, thereupon they brought forth all the brilliant things: the Quetzal feather head fan, the devices, the shields, the golden disc, the golden nose crescents, the golden leg bands, the golden arm bands, the golden forehead bands. Thereupon was detached all the gold at once. They ignited, set fire to all the precious things. They all burned, and the gold the Spaniards formed into separate bars, and the Spanish walked everywhere. They took all that they saw, which they saw to be good. Thereupon they went to Montezuma's own storehouse at the palace called Totocalco. They brought forth Montezuma's own property, precious things, all the necklaces with pendants, the armbands with tufts, the Quetzal feathers, the golden armbands, the bracelets, the golden bands with shells, and the turquoise diadem, the attributed of the ruler. They took it all. DV8 said Bernardino Sanders. Hell yeah, that's right. I'm wearing my Bernie shirt. Okay. The military conquest of the Aztecs was completed by 1521. Cortés, as governor of the province of Spain, then began dividing up the most valuable resources, the indigenous population, through the institution of encomendi. Oh, wait, hold on. We're learning the Spanish word together. Encomenada. Oh, encomienda. There we go. Thank you. Okay. Began dividing up the most valuable resources, the indigenous population, through the institution of encomienda. No, I said it wrong. Encomienda? That it seems like it's too many letters for this word. Encomienda. Okay. The encomienda had first appeared in 15th century Spain as part of the reconquest of the south of the country from the Moors, Arabs who had settled during and after the 8th century. In the New World, it took on a much more hold on, I don't even know what this word is. Pernicious? Let me look it up real quick. Pernicious describes something causing great harm, ruin, injury, or subtle, insidious, or gradual manner, derived from the Latin, destructive. Okay, crazy. Okay, so in the New World, it took a much more destructive form. It was a grant of indigenous peoples to a Spaniard known as the encomendero, so not the encomendia. We're getting mixed up. Okay. Encomendero. The indigenous people had to give the encomendero tribute and labor services, in exchange for which the encomendero was charged with converting them to Christianity. Okay. A vivid early account of the workings of the Hold on. Sorry. I'm so sorry, chat. We are struggling. Encomienda. Why am I so confused with this? Okay. Had come down for us from Bartholomew de las Casas. Thank you, Bishon in a box. I'm struggling, but your support gives me faith. Whoops. I'm sorry. I'm trying to plug in my light. Thank you, DV8. Appreciate it. There we go. Okay, we're good. Okay. Vivid early accounts of the workings had come down to us from Bartolomeo de la Casa, a Dominican priest who formulated the earliest and one of the most devastating critiques of the Spanish colonial system. De la Casa Casas arrived on the Spaniard island of Hispaniola in 1502 with a fleet of ships led by the new governor, Nicolás de Ovando. He became increasingly disillusioned and disturbed by the cruel and exploitative treatment of the indigenous people he witnessed every day. In 1513, he took part of the chaplain in the Spanish conquest of Cuba, even being granted an whatever for his services. However, he renounced the grant and began a long campaign to reform Spanish colonial institutions. His efforts culminated in his book, A Short Account of the Destruction of the Indies, written in 1542, a withering attack on the barbarity of Spanish rule. On the Encomienda, he had this to say in the case of Nicaragua. Each of the settlers took up residence in the town allotted to him, or recommended to him, as a large phrase has put it. The inhabitants to work for him stole their already scarce foodstuff for himself and took over the lands owned and worked by the natives, and on which they traditionally grew their own produce. The settler would treat the whole of the native population, dignitaries, old men, women, and children, as members of his household, and as such make them labor night and day in his own interest without any rest whatsoever. For the conquest of New Granada, modern Colombia, de las Casas reported the whole Spanish strategy in action. To realize their long-term purpose of seizing all the available gold, the Spaniards employed their usual strategy of appropriating among themselves, or commending, whatever, that's the English version of the word, the towns and their inhabitants, and then, as ever treating them as common slaves, the man in overall command of the expedition seized the king of whose territory for himself and held him prisoner for 6 or 7 months, quite illicitly demanding more and more gold and emeralds from him. This king, the one of Bogota, was so terrified that his anxiety to free himself from the clutches of his tormentors, he consented to the demand that he fill an entire house with gold or handed over, with gold and handed over. To this end, he sent his people off in search of gold, and bit by bit they brought it along with many precious stones. But still the house was not filled, and the Spaniards eventually declared that they would put him to death for breaking his promise. The commander suggested they should bring the case before him as a representative of the law, and when they did so, entertaining formal accusations against the king, he sentenced him to torture should he persist in not honoring the bargain. They tortured him with the strappado, putting burning tallow on his belly, pinned both his legs to poles with iron hoops, and his neck with another, and then, with 2 men holding his hands, proceeded to burn the soles of his feet. From time to time, the commander would look in and repeat that they would torture him to death slowly unless he produced more gold. And this is what they did. The king eventually succumbed to the agonies they inflicted on him. The strategies and institutions of conquest perfected in Mexico were eagerly adopted elsewhere in the Spanish Empire. Nowhere was this done more efficiently than in Pizarro's conquest of Peru, as de las Casas began in his account. In 1531, another great villain journeyed with a number of men to the kingdom of Peru. He set out with every intention of imitating the strategy and tactics of his fellow adventurers in other parts of the New World. Pizarro began on the coast near the Peruvian town of Tumbles and marched south. On November 15th, 1532, he reached the mountain town of Cajamarca, where the Incan emperor Atahalapa, was encamped with his army. The next day, Atahaulapa had just vanquished his brother Huascar in a contest over who would succeed with the decreased father. Juan Capac came to his what are these words? Retine? Hold on. Sorry, chat. We are learning together. But yeah, isn't that crazy how much they tortured these people? And just for what? For the crime of saying that I was going to get you gold, but like not actually? That's crazy. Retune. Yeah, retune. A group of advisors, assistants, or others accompanying an. Oh, so it's like retainers, right? Is that what it is? Don't retinue? Okay. Okay, so this guy came with his retinue to where the Spaniards were camped. Oh my god, Bichon in a Box Heads gives the El Dorado cartoon movie a different perspective. I know completely. It's crazy. Okay, Atahalapa, was irritated because nudes of atrocities that the Spanish had already committed, such as violating a temple of the sun god Inti, had reached him. What transpired next is well known. The Spanish laid a trap and sprang it. They killed Atahalapa's guards and retainers, possibly as many as 2,000 people, and captured the king. To gain his freedom, Atahalapa had to promise to fill one room with gold and two more of the same size with silver. He did this, but the Spanish, reneging on their promises, strangled him in July 1533. That November, the Spanish captured the Incan capital of Cusco, where the Incan aristocracy received the same treatment as Atahalapa, being imprisoned until they produced gold and silver. Damn, like not even is it just El Dorado. Now we're going into the Emperor's New Groove. Like, imagine going into those mountains and taking out all those people. That's crazy. You know what? Honestly, I don't want to learn about American history. I want to learn about this. Like what the stuff we learn about in this same time period, 1530s or whatever, we're just learning about the freaking Protestant Christians coming over to America and starting the 13 colonies. This is where the cultural hub was. This is like where America was at the time, you know? Man. Spanish taking over Cusco. Okay. When they did not satisfy Spanish demands, they were burned alive. The great artistic treasures of Cusco, such as the Temple of the Sun, had their gold stripped from them and melted down into ingots. At this point, the Spanish focused on the people of the Incan Empire. As in Mexico, citizens were divided into encomendas. Okay, whatever. But Shonen in a Box just said, "Hey, I'm here for my husband, Tetsuka Telepoka." I don't even know, brother. Well, I don't even know. Look, I can easily remove you as a moderator. I just want you to know that, Bishonen in a Box. With one going, okay, so they were divided, with one going to each of the conquistadors who had accompanied Pizarro. The Encomenda was the main institution used for the control and organization of labor in the early colonial period, but it soon faced a vigorous contender. In 1545, a local named Diego Gualpa was searching for an indigenous shrine high in the Andes in what is today Bolivia. He was thrown to the ground by a sudden gust of wind. In front of him appeared a cache of silver ore. This was part of the vast mountain of silver, which the Spanish baptized El Cerro Rico, the rich hill. Around it grew the city of Potosi, which at its height in 1650 had a population of 160,000 people, larger than Lisbon or Venice in that period. What? That's crazy. That's crazy. This was a bigger, more populated area, and we were just colonizing them. Well, I mean, we were just colonizing them. Hold on, let me take a quick pause and blow my nose. All right. To exploit the silver, the Spanish needed miners, a lot of miners. They sent a new viceroy, the chief Spanish colonial official, Francisco de Toledo, whose main mission was to solve the labor problem. De Toledo, arriving in Peru in 1569, first spent 5 years traveling around and investigating his new charge. He also commissioned a massive survey of the entire adult population. To find the labor he needed, De Toledo first moved almost the entire indigenous population, concentrating them into new towns called reducciones. Reducciones, right? Literally, quote unquote, reductions, which would facilitate the exploitation of labor by the Spanish crown. Man, this sounds like ghettos, honestly. Reducciones. Then he revived and adapted an Incan labor institution known as the Mita, which in the Incans' language, Quechua, means a turn. Under their Mita system, the Incans had used forced labor to run plantations designed to provide food for temples, the aristocracy, and the army. In return, the Incan elite provided famine relief and security. In De Toledo's hands, the Mita, especially the Potosi Mita, was to become the largest and most honest. Hold on, I need to look up another word. Need to look up these complex adult words. Onerous? Is that like honorary? Onerous describes a task, duty, or responsibility that is excessively burdensome, oppressive, or troublesome, requiring significant effort to manage. Okay, so it just sounds like literally slave labor. Okay. Okay, so the Potosi Mita was to become the largest and most honest scheme of labor exploitation in the Spanish colonial period. De Toledo defined a huge catchment area running from the middle of modern-day Peru and encompassing most of modern Bolivia. It covered about 200,000 square miles. Oh my God, 200,000 square miles. In this area, 1/7 of the male inhabitants newly arrived in their reducciones were required to work in the mines at Potosi. The Potosi Mita endured throughout the entire colonial period and was abolished only in 1825. Damn. Map 1 shows the catchment area of the Mita superimposed. Okay, hold on. Let's see. Go down. Oh, here we go. We got picture. DV8 said Potosi looks like Spain. Like the city. Let me look it up. It's along a hill. Oh, it's in Bolivia. Damn, I did not know this. Let's go to no, let's look at pictures on Wikipedia. Oh, known as the Villa Imperial de Potosi, in the colonial period is the capital city and municipality of the department of Potosi in Bolivia. It is one of the highest cities in the world at a nominal 1300 feet high. Wow. Diego Hualpa, indigenous prospector, traditionally credited with the discovery of this. Oh, that's what the guy who had saw the ore. Wow. So it's just this ginormous hill that's filled with silver. That's crazy. Oh, look, here's the Mita system. Let's look at Google Maps real quick. I would love to see that actually. Open in Maps. And let's see it. Okay, so it's like right there. And let's go back to the PDF. Whoops. Okay. So it's, yeah, right there. Potosi's right there. And then back, yeah. I mean, crazy. It's just, yeah, all this land, man. Crazy, crazy, crazy. Okay, back to the book. Oh, Deviate said I meant to say the buildings look Spanish. Well, that makes sense. I mean, if it's like the central hub, of course they were going to make it look Spanish. But yeah, that's what I originally thought you were saying too. But then, like, yeah, it was just cool to see the hill. Crazy, crazy. Okay. But in this picture, you can kind of see, like, I don't know if they had like a little trail, but I mean, if the Spanish sailed in through Buenos Aires, they would just, bam, right there, that little port. They could just travel to the Asunción area, that one second city that they made, and then the Potosi city, and then they went to Cusco, so continuing up the Andes. And then the last city that we were talking about was the Cajamarca, I guess. Cajamarca. That's all the way at the top of Peru, almost to Ecuador. Crazy, but that makes sense. They were going along the mountains, and I mean, like, that's where all the gold and silver is. Okay. Anyways, the book says, remarkably, you still see the legacy of the Mita in Peru today. Take the differences between the province of Calca and nearby Acomayo. Acomayo. Thank you, sorry. Calca and Acomayo. There appears to be a few differences among the provinces. Both are high in the mountains, and each is inhabited by the Quechua-speaking descendants of the Incas. Yet Acoyomaya is much poorer, with the inhabitants consuming about 1/3 less than those in Calca. The people know this. In Acomaya, they ask intrepid foreigners, don't you know that the people here are poorer than the people over in Calca? Why would you ever want to come here? Intrepid? Yeah, intrepid. That's not the word interpret. Hold on. Intrepid, because it is much harder to get to Acomaya from the regional capital of Cusco. Cusco, ancient center of the Incan Empire, than it is to get to Calca. The road to Calca is surfaced, and the one to Acomaya is a terrible state of disrepair. To get beyond Acomaya, you need a horse or a mule. In Calca and Acomaya, people grow the same crops, but in Calca, they sell them on the market for money. In Acomaya, they grow food for their own subsistence. These inequalities, apparent to the eye of the people who live there, can be understood in terms of the institutional differences between these departments. Institutional differences with historical roots going back to De Toledo and his plan for effective exploitation of indigenous labor. The major historical difference between Acomaya and Calca is that Acomaya was in the catchment area of the Potosi Mita and Calca was not. In addition to the concentration of labor and the Mita, De Toledo consolidated the encomenda into a head tax, a fixed sum payable by each adult male every year in silver. Oh, so like you could like pay you could pay instead of getting drafted. That makes a lot of sense. This was another scheme designed to force people into the labor market and reduce wages for Spanish landowners. Another institution, the Repartimiento de Mercancías, is that mercenary? No. Okay. Whoops, I just rubbed my eye. Okay. Was also widespread during Toledo's tenure, derived from the Spanish verb repatriar. Repatriar. There we go. Repatriar. Oh my God, we are getting a workout today. I'm sorry. But this is what it's for. Sorry, I should have said earlier, part of the reason why I want to read on stream is to get better at talking. Because goddamn, I suck at it. Okay, so derived from the Spanish verb to distribute, this redistribution literally means the distribution of goods. Involved the forced sale of goods to locals at prices determined by the Spaniards. Finally, De Toledo introduced the trajín, literally meaning the burden, which used the indigenous people to carry heavy loads of goods such as wine or coca leaves or textiles as a substitute for pack animals. Oh my God, instead of bringing animals, they're like, nah, we can just have the indigenous people carry it and that'll pay off their debts. What the fuck? That's crazy. Throughout the Spanish colonial world in the Americas, similar institutions and social structures emerged. Oh, Deviate said, I feel kind of weird reading things out loud. Yeah, that's why I was like, well, I guess the only way to get better at it is just immersion therapy, right? So, I don't know. Sometimes I feel like I don't get as distracted in my own thoughts when I'm reading out loud, because when I read silently, my brain just wanders off and starts thinking about other things. But if I'm like actually speaking and reading out loud at the same time and hearing the words that I'm actually saying and not just reading them in my head, it helps me concentrate better. So, but anyways, thank you for participating and being here with me. Really interesting reading so far, right? After an initial phase of looting and gold and silver lust, the Spanish created a web of institutions designed to exploit the indigenous people. The full gamut of encomendas, mita, repartimiento, and trajín was designed to force indigenous people's living standards down into a substance level. Substance. Hold on. Sorry. It was to make the indigenous people have a lower level of living. I'm just gonna summarize this. Okay. And thus extract all incomes in excess for this for Spaniards. This was achieved by expropriating their land, forcing them to work, offering low wages for labor services, imposing high taxes, and charging high prices for goods that were not even voluntarily bought. These institutions generated a lot of wealth for the Spanish crown and made the conquistadors and their descendants very rich, they also turned Latin America into the most unequal continent in the world and sapped most of its economic potential. Okay, another big point here. We've been doing the comparisons of cities, right? First we did Nogales, America versus Nogales, Mexico. Then we now did all these different cities in Latin America that were literally different from the get-go when the Spanish invaded because they made it different. So, let me go get some more water real quick. I'll be right Okay. I'm back, everyone, and I have a special announcement. We have a special visitor on stream who stole my chair. It's Beebs. It's Beebs. There you go. Yeah, that's what they do. All they do is eat food, poop, and steal your chair. Okay. Yeah, it is his chair now. I'm not getting it back. I got my other chair though. We're good. Okay, back to the hella interesting reading. Oh, thank you, Stardust. One day he'll take the big seat. Well, I mean, I guess he did take the big seat already. Um, he'll get behind the camera. Okay. All right. So now here's where this book gets hella more interesting because we're going to talk about Jamestown now. All right. Okay. To Jamestown. As the Spanish began their conquest of the Americas in 1490s, England was in a minor European power. England was a minor European power recovering from the devastating effects of a civil war, the War of the Roses. She was in no state to take advantage of the scramble for loot and gold at the opportunity to exploit the indigenous people of the Americas. Nearly 100 years later, in 1588, the uh, lucky route of the Spanish Armada was attempted by King Philip II of Spain to invade England, sent political shock waves around Europe. Fortunate though England's victory was, it was also fortunate though England's victory was, it was also a sign of growing English assertiveness on the seas that would enable them to finally take part in the quest for colonial empire. It is thus no coincidence that English began their colonization of North America at exactly the same time, but they were already latecomers. They chose North America not because it was attractive, but it was because it was all that was available. The quote unquote desirable parts of the Americas, where the indigenous population to exploit was plentiful and where the gold and silver mines were located, had already been occupied. The English got the leftovers. When the 18th century English writer and agriculturalist Arthur Young discussed where profitable staple products, by which he meant exportable agricultural goods, were produced, he noted, "It appears upon the whole that the staple production of our colonies decreased in value in proportion to their distance from the sun. In the West Indies, which are the hottest of all, they make the amount of 8 liters or whatever, or 8L, whatever these weird measurements are, um, per head in the southern colonial continents ones, to the amount of, okay, so he's just comparing the difference, whatever arbitrary scale he made up to measure the like production to labor output, I guess. Um, So this scale surely suggests that as most important lesson to avoid colonizing in northern latitudes. That was basically the gist of his argument. The first English attempt to plan a colony at Roanoke in North Carolina. We should watch American Horror Story Roanoke. Well, no. I'm thinking of the one in Maine. I'm sorry. But yeah, I do want to watch Roanoke. In North Carolina between 1585 and 1587 was a complete failure. In 1607, they tried again. Shortly before the end of 1606, 3 vessels, Susan Constant, Godspeed, and Discovery, under the command of Captain Christopher Newport, set off for Virginia. The colonists, under the auspice of the Virginia Company, sailed into Chesapeake Bay and up the river they named the James after the ruling English monarch, James I. On May 14th, 1607, they founded the settlement of Jamestown. Though the settlers on board the ship owned by the Virginia Company were English, they had a model of colonization heavily influenced by the template set up by Cortez, Pizarro, and de Toledo. Oh yeah, Mr. LeBron James of Virginia Company. Their first plan was to capture the local chiefs and use him as a way to get provisions and to coerce the population into producing food and wealth for them. When they first landed in Jamestown, the English colonists did not know that they were within the territory claimed by the Powhatan Confederacy, a coalition of some 30 polities owning allegiance to a kingdom called Wahunasanacock. Wahunasanacock's capital was Wahunasanacock's capital was at the town of Weruwokomoko. Oh my God, these names. We're going from Latin America to where they were like Spanish and back of the throat sounding. Now we're going up here to North America where it just seems like it's just repeated vowels. I'm sorry. Okay, so Weruwokomoko, and a mere 20 miles from Jamestown, the plan of the colonists was to learn more about the lay of the land. If the locals could not be induced to provide food and labor, the colonists might at least be able to trade with them. The notion that the settlers sometimes would work and grow their own food seems not to have crossed their minds. This is not what the conquerors of the New World did. Yeah, you just go there and you find people to make food for you. Wahunsunakak quickly became aware of the colonists' presence and viewed their intentions with great suspicion. He was in charge of what for North America was quite a large empire. But he had many enemies and lacked the overwhelming centralized political control of the Incas. Wahunsunakak decided to see what the intentions of the English were, initially sending messengers saying that he desired friendly relations with them. As the winter of 1607 closed in, the settlers in Jamestown began to run low on food, and the appointed leader of the colony's ruling council, Edward Marie Wingfield, dithered indecisively. The situation was rescued by Captain John Smith, whose writings proved one of our main sources of information about the early development of the colony, was a larger-than-life character. Born in England, in rural Lincolnshire, he disregarded his father's desires for him to go into business and instead became a soldier of fortune. He first fought with English armies in the Netherlands, after which he joined Austrian forces serving in Hungary, fighting against the armies of the Ottoman Empire. Captured in Romania, he was sold as a slave and put to work as a field hand. He managed one day to overcome his master and, stealing his clothes and his horse, escaped back into Austrian territory. Smith had got himself into trouble on the voyage to Virginia and was imprisoned on the Susan Constant for mutiny after defying orders of Wingfield. Great. John Smith, my fake name. Yeah. Only second to Rusty Shackelford. Oh man, John Smith is crazy. And I can't believe just Pocahontas is like, oh my god, he's just a dorky white guy who, found all the colors of the wind and fell in love with Pocahontas. No, homie was out here being just straight up like Bucky from Bucky from Marvel. Not Bucky, but it's like, man, he was all over the place. He was like living the life. Okay. But it's crazy that he was sold as a slave and then literally went to the New World and was like, yep, all these people, slaves. Let's figure out how to put them into slavery. All right. When the ships reached the New World, the plan was to put him on trial. The immense horror of Wingfield, Newport, and other elite colonists, however, when they opened their sealed orders, they discovered that the Virginia Company had nominated Smith to be a member of the ruling council that was to govern Jamestown. Wow. With Newport sailing back to England for supplies and more colonists, Wingfield uncertain about what to do, it was Smith who saved the colony. He initiated a series of trading missions that secured vital food supplies. On one of these, he was captured by Opechancanough, one of Washuna Sunacock's younger brothers, and was brought before the king at Werowocomoco. He was the first Englishman to meet Wahun Sunacock, and it was at this initial meeting that, according to some accounts, Smith's life was saved only at the intervention of Wahuna Sunacock's young daughter, Pocahontas. Damn. Sorry. Full circle. Freed on January 2nd, 1608, Smith returned to Jamestown, which was still perilously low on food, until the timely return of Newport from England later on the same day. The colonists of Jamestown learned little from this initial experience. As 1608 proceeded, they continued their quest for gold and precious metals. They still did not seem to understand that to survive, they could not rely on the locals to feed them through either coercion or trade. It was Smith who was first to realize that the model of colonization that had worked so well for Cortez and Pizarro simply would not work in North America. The underlying circumstances were just too different. Smith noted that, unlike the Aztecs and Incas, the peoples of Virginia did not have gold. Indeed, he noted in his diary, victuals you must know in all their wealth. Anna Toadkill, and one of the early settlers who left an extensive diary, expressed well the frustrations of Smith and the few others in which this recognition dawned. There was no talk, no hope, no work, but dig gold, refine gold, load gold. When Newport sailed for England in April 1608, he took a cargo of pyrite, aka fool's gold. He returned at the end of September with orders from the Virginia Company to take firmer control over the locals. Their plan was to crown Wahun Sunacock, hoping this would render him subservient to the English King James. They invited him to Jamestown, but Wahun Sunacock, still deeply suspicious of the colonist, had no intention of risking capture. John Smith recorded Wahuna Sunacock's reply. If your king had sent me presents, I also am king, and this is my land. Your father is to come to me, not I to him, nor yet to your fort. Neither I will bite at such a bait. If Wahuna Sunakak would not bite at such a bait, Newport and Smith would have to go to Werowocomoco to undertake the coronation. The whole event appears to have been a complete fiasco, with the only thing coming out of it a resolve on the part of Wahuna Sunakak that it was time to get rid of the colony. He imposed a trade embargo. Jamestown could no longer trade for supplies. Wahuna Sunakak would starve them out. Newport set sail once more for England in December 1608. He took with him a letter written by Smith pleading with the directors of the Virginia Company to change the way they thought about the colony. There was no possibility of a get-rich-quick exploitation of Virginia along the lines of Mexico and Peru. There were no gold or precious metals, and the indigenous people could not be forced to work or provide food. Smith realized that if there were going to be a viable colony, it had to be the colonist who would have to work. He therefore pleaded with the directors to send the right sort of people. When you send again, I entreat you rather send some 30 carpenters, husbandmen, gardeners, fishermen, blacksmiths, masons, and diggers up of trees' roots well provided than thousands such we have. Smith did not want any more useless goldsmiths. Once more, Jamestown survived only because of his resourcefulness. He managed to cajole and bully local indigenous groups to trade with him. And when they wouldn't, he took what he could. Back in the settlements, Smith was completely in charge and imposed the rule that he that will not work shall not eat. Jamestown survived a second winter. The Virginia Company was intended to be a money-making enterprise, and after 2 disastrous years, there was no whiff of profit. The directors of the company decided that they needed a new model of governance, replacing the ruling council with a single governor. The first man appointed to this position was Sir Thomas Gates. Heeding some aspect of Smith's warning, the company realized that they had to try something new. This realization was driven home by the events of the winter of 1609-1610, the so-called starving time. The new mode of governance left no room for Smith, who, disgruntled, returned to England for the autumn of 1609. Without his resourcefulness, and with Wahun Sunakak throttling the food supply, the colonists in Jamestown perished. Of the 500 who entered the winter, only 60 were alive by March. The situation was so desperate that they resorted to cannibalism. The something new that was imposed on the colony by Gates and his deputies, Sir Thomas Dale, was a work regime of draconian severity for English settlers, though not, of course, for the elite running the colony. It was Dale who propagated the laws divine, morale, and martial. This included the clauses, "No man or woman shall run away from the colony to the Indians upon pain of death. Anyone who robs a garden, public or private, or a vineyard, who steals ears of corn shall be punished with death. No member of the colony will sell or give any commodity of this country to a captain, mariner, master, or sailor to transport out of the colony for his own private uses upon pain of death." Wow, that was crazy. DV8 said, "Get rich glitch, still working in 2026. That's right. That's crazy." Here is a really good image of a map. So everyone in chat, please look at the screen right now. I was almost going to say it's a biblically accurate map, but it's just, an accurate globe map, and that's why it looks kind of curved. But the darker areas represent higher, more densely populated areas, and the lighter areas show less densely populated areas. So you can see in Latin America, in South America, it's way more populated than North America. Well, I mean, I guess Mexico was very, very populated, but that was already said and done. So the English couldn't go there. So the English went to the United States. Like even Canada had more densely populated people. I don't know. Maybe the whole of the United States hasn't done like a good enough time doing the research because California is a little bit more. So is Washington, and then I think this is Alabama. But anyways, you can see Brazil is completely dark. Peru, Ecuador, Colombia, Venezuela, Panama, Mexico, all of these countries are dark. And that's because that's where all the indigenous people were in the Americas. They were in, Central and South America where the weather was great. It's just crazy. Okay. If the indigenous people could not be exploited, reasoned the Virginia Company, perhaps the colonist could. The new model of colonial development entailed the Virginia Company owning all the land. Men were housed in barracks and given company-determined rations. Work gangs were chosen, each one overseen by an agent of the company. It was close to martial law, with execution as punishment of first resort. That's crazy. As part of the new institution for the colony, the first clause just given is significant. The company threatened with death those who ran away. Given the New York regime, running away to live with locals became more and more of an attractive option for the colonists who had to do the work. Also available, given the low density of even indigenous populations in Virginia at the time, was the prospect of going it alone on the frontier beyond the control of Virginia Company. The power of the company in the face of these options was limited. It could not coerce the English settlers into hard work at subsistence rations. Okay, so then explaining the map, it took the Virginia Company some time to recognize that the initial model of colonization did not work in Virginia, and it took a while too for the failures of the laws divine, morale, and martial to sink in. Starting in 1618, a dramatically new strategy was adopted. Since it was possible to coerce neither the locals nor the settlers, the only alternative was to give the settlers incentives. In 1618, the company began the head right system, which gave each male settler 50 acres of land and 50 more acres for each member of his family and for all servants that his family could bring to Virginia. Settlers were given their houses and freed from their contracts. And in 1619, a General Assembly was introduced that effectively gave all adult men a say in the laws and institutions governing the colony. It was the start of democracy in the United States. It took the Virginia Company 12 years to learn its first lesson that what had worked for the Spanish in Mexico and Central and South America would not work in the North. The rest of the 17th century saw a long series of struggles over the second lesson, that the only option for an economically viable colony was to create institutions that gave the colonists incentives to invest and work hard. As North America developed, English elites tried time and time again to set up institutions that would heavily restrict the economic and political rights for all, but a privileged few of the inhabitants of the colony, just as the Spanish did. Yet, in each case, this model broke down as it had in Virginia. One of the most ambitious attempts began soon after the change of strategy of the Virginia Company. In 1632, 10 million acres of lands on the upper Chesapeake Bay were granted by the English King Charles I to Cecilius Calvert, Lord Baltimore. The Charter of Maryland gave Lord Baltimore complete freedom to create a government along any lines he wished, with Clause 7 noting that Baltimore had for the good and with Clause 7 noting that Baltimore had, for the good and happy government of said province, free, full, and absolute power by the tenor of these presents, to ordain, make, and enact laws of what kind soever. Deviate said, "We haven't really evolved, have we?" No. Whatever political systems were put in place at this time in America already set the tone for the political systems we have in place today. And the same goes for Latin America, because they set up such a system where they were ruling over the indigenous people and able to force them to do things more. Like I don't understand why this might sound kind of weird, but I don't understand why the English colonist couldn't coerce or capture the natives in a similar way that they did in Peru and with the Incans. It's just crazy. I guess because the Incans were more set up, where they already had an aristocracy, and then once you took out that aristocracy, everyone else just followed so easily. But maybe the Native Americans of North America didn't have that much division, and that's why it was harder to divide and conquer, because everyone was acting as their own agent, kind of. I don't know. It will be very interesting. I would love to talk to someone. I would love to talk to a Native American expert and ask about that, because that would be a good conversation. Okay. Baltimore drew up a detailed plan for creating a manorial society, a North American variant of an idealized version of 17th century rural England. It entailed dividing the land into plots of thousands of acres, which would be run by lords. The lords would recruit tenants who would work the land and pay rents to the privileged elite controlling the land. Another similar attempt was made later in 1663. With the founding of Carolina by 8 proprietors, including Sir Anthony Ashley Cooper. Ashley Cooper, along with his secretary, the great English philosopher John Locke, formulated the fundamental constitutions of Carolina. This document, like the Charter of Maryland before it, provided a blueprint for an elitist hierarchical society based on control by a landed elite. The preamble noted that the government of this province may be made most agreeable to the monarchy under which we live and which this province is part, and that we may avoid erecting a numerous democracy. The clauses of the fundamental constitution laid out a rigid social structure. At the bottom were leetmen, with clause 23 noting, all the children of leetmen shall be leetmen, and so to all generations. Above the leetmen, who had no political power, were the landgraves and caziques, who were to form the aristocracy. Landgravers were to be allocated 48,000 acres of land each, and the caziques 24,000 acres. There was to be a parliament in which the landgravers and caziques were represented, but it would be permitted to debate only those measures that had previously been approved by the 8 proprietors. Just as an attempt to impose draconian rule in Virginia failed, so did the plans for the same type of institutions in Maryland and Carolina. The reasons were similar. In all cases, it proved to be impossible to force settlers into a rigid hierarchical society because there were simply too many options open to them in the New World. Instead, they had to be provided with incentives for them to want to work, and soon they were demanding more economic freedom and further political rights. In Maryland, too, settlers insisted on getting their own land, and they forced Lord Baltimore into creating an assembly. In 1691, the assembly inducted the king to declare Maryland a crown colony, thus removing the political privileges of Baltimore and his great lords. A similar protracted struggle took place in the Carolinas, again with the proprietors losing. South Carolina became a royal colony in 1729. By the 1720s, all 13 colonies of what was to become the United States had similar structures of government. In all cases, there was a governor and an assembly based on the franchise of male property holders. They were not democracies. Women, slaves, and the property list could not vote. But political rights were very broad compared with contemporary societies elsewhere. It was these assemblies and their leaders that coalesced to form the First Continental Congress in 1774, the prelude to the independence of the United States. The assemblies believed that they had the right to determine both their own membership and the right to taxation. This, as we know, created problems for the English colonial government. Damn! What a fire way to end that. Sorry. Gave me chills. Okay. DV8 said, yeah, it's crazy. The foundation goes way back. I meant the system goes way back. Yeah. System goes way back. All right. I think this is the last section, and then we can move on to the next thing. A Tale of Two Constitutions. It should now be apparent that it is not a coincidence that the United States and not Mexico adopted and enforced a constitution that espoused democratic principles, created limitations on the use of political power, and distributed that power broadly in society. The document that the delegates sat down to write in Philadelphia in May 1787 was the outcome of a long process initiated by the formation of the General Assembly in Jamestown in 1619. The contracts between the constitutional process that took place at the time of independence of the United States at the one that took place a little after. The contrast between the constitutional process that took place at the time of independence of the United States and the one that took place a little afterward in Mexico is stark. In February 1808, Napoleon Bonaparte's French armies invaded Spain. By May, they had taken Madrid, the Spanish capital. By September, the Spanish king Ferdinand had been captured and abdicated. A national junta, the Junta Central, took his place, taking the torch in the fight against the French. The junta met first at Aranjuez, but retreated south in the face of French armies. Finally, it reached the port of Cadiz, which, though besieged by Napoleonic forces, held out. Here, the junta formed a parliament called the Cortes. In 1812, the Cortes produced what became known as the Cadiz Constitution, which called for introduction of constitutional monarchy based on notions of popular sovereignty. It also called for the end of special privileges and the introduction of equality before the law. These demands were all anthem to the elites of South America. Anthem? Let me look up this word real quick. Something or someone vehemently dislikes. Okay, these demands were all disliked by the elites of South America, who were still ruling an institutional environment shaped by the encomienda, forced labor, and absolute power vested in them and the colonial state. Oh, I see. So if the Spanish in Spain were like, nah, we want to have more equal judgment under the eyes of the law, and that's crazy. That would make a big drama between the two. All right. Okay. It was only a matter of time before they began to sense the possibility of becoming truly independent from Spain. The first declaration of independence took place in La Paz, Bolivia, in 1809, though it was quickly crushed by Spanish troops sent from Peru. In Mexico, the political attitudes of the elite had been shaped by the 1810 Hidalgo revolt led by priest Father Miguel Hidalgo. When what? Hidalgo. When Hidalgo's army sacked Guanajuato on September 23rd, they killed the intendant, the senior colonial office official, and then started indiscriminately to kill white people. It was more like class or even ethnic warfare than an independence movement, and it united all the elites in opposition. If independence allowed popular participation in politics, the local elites, not just the Spaniards, were against it. Consequently, Mexican elites viewed the Cadiz Constitution, which opened the way to popular participation, with extreme skepticism, and they would never recognize its legitimacy. In 1815, as Napoleon's European empire collapsed, King Ferdinand VII returned to power and the Cadiz Constitution was abrogated. I'm assuming that means it got rid of. As the Spanish crown began trying to reclaim its American colonies, it did not face a problem with loyalist Mexico. Yet in 1820, a Spanish army that had assembled in Cadiz to sail to the Americas to help restore Spanish authority mutinied against Ferdinand VII. They were soon joined by army units throughout the country, and Ferdinand was forced to restore the Cadiz Constitution and recall the Cortes. This Cortes was even more radical than the one that had written the Cadiz Constitution, and it proposed abolishing all form of labor coercion. It also attacked special privileges, for example, the right of the military to be tried for crimes in their own courts. Faced finally with the imposition of the document in Mexico, the elites there decided that it was better to go it alone and declare independence. Of course, so that way they can still keep the power, the imbalance of power that not even Europe wanted anymore. This independence movement was led by Agustin de Iturbe, who had been an officer in the Spanish army. On February 24th, 1821, he published the Plan de Iguala, his vision for an independent Mexico. The plan featured a constitutional monarchy with a Mexican emperor and removed the provisions of the Cadiz Constitution that Mexican elites found so threatening to their statuses and privileges. It received instantaneous support, and Spain quickly realized that it could not stop the inevitable. But Iturbe did not just organize Mexican succession, recognizing a power vacuum. He quickly took advantage of his military backing to have himself declared emperor, a position that the great leader of South American independence, Simón Bolívar, described as by the grace of God and bayonets. Iturbe was not constrained by the same political institutions that constrained presidents of the United States. He quickly made himself a dictator, and by October 1822 he had dismissed the constitutionally sanctioned Congress and replaced it with a junta of his choosing. Though Iturbe did not last long, this pattern of events was to be repeated time and time again in 19th century Mexico. The Constitution of the United States did not create democracy by modern standards. Who could vote in elections was left up to individual states to determine, while northern states quickly conceded the vote to all white men, irrespectively of how much income they earned or property they owned. Southern states did so only gradually. No state enfranchised women or slaves as property and wealth restrictions were lifted on white men. Racial franchises explicitly disenfranchising black men was introduced. Slavery, of course, was deemed constitutional when the Constitution of the United States was written in Philadelphia. And the most sordid, the division of the seats in the House of Representatives among the states. These were to be allocated on the basis of states' populations. But the congressional representatives of southern states then demanded that the slaves be counted. Northerners objected. The compromise was that in appropriating seats to the House of Representatives, a slave would count as 3/5 of a free person. The conflicts between the North and South of the United States was repressed during the constitutional process as a 3/5 rule and other compromises were worked out. New fixes were added over time. For example, the Missouri Compromise, an arrangement where one pro-slavery and one anti-slavery state were always added to the Union together to keep the balance in the Senate between those for and those against slavery. These fudges kept political institutions in the United States working peacefully until the Civil War finally resolved the conflicts in favor of the North. The Civil War was bloody and destructive, but both before and after there were ample economic opportunities for large factions of the population, especially in the northern and western United States. The situation in Mexico was very different. If the United States experienced 5 years of political instability between 1860 and 1865, Mexico experienced almost non-stop instability for the first 50 years of independence. This was best illustrated via the career of Antonio López de Santa Anna. Santa Anna, son of colonial official in Veracruz, came to prominence as a soldier fighting for the Spanish in the independence wars. In 1821, he switched sides with Iturbe and never looked back. He became president of Mexico for the first time in May of 1833, though he exercised power for less than a month, preferring to let Valentina Gómez Farías as president. Gómez Farías' presidency lasted 15 days, which after Santa Anna retook power. This was brief as his first spell, however, and he was again replaced by Gómez Farías in early July. Santa Anna and Gómez Farías continued this dance until the middle of 1835, when Santa Anna was replaced by Miguel Barragán. But Santa Anna was not a quitter. He was back as president in 1839, 1841, 1844, 1847, and finally between 1853 and 1855. In all, he was president 11 times, during which he presided over the loss of the Alamo and Texas and the disastrous Mexican-American War, which led to the loss of what became New Mexico and Arizona. Between 1824 and 1867, there were 52 presidents in Mexico. Damn, in 40 years. Yeah, 1824 through 18... Oh my God. Few of whom assumed power according to any constitution sanctioned procedure. Okay, so they were all like illegitimate presidents that like the people of Mexico did not actually care for. Crazy. It's almost like Latin America started on violence, and that was the whole way that they chose. Just violently bullhead through everything. And then America and England was like, we can't be that violent. I mean, because like, I don't know, man. I feel like if you really wanted to, if these English colonists really wanted to enslave the indigenous people, they could have. But for whatever reason, they didn't. And that confuses me. Or I should say, maybe the Spanish had an easier time. I don't know, man. We got to figure that out more. I need to talk to some indigenous historic people because they will know the answers, I'm sure. Okay. The consequences of this unprecedented political instability for economic institutions and incentives should be obvious. Such instability led to higher insecure property rights. It also led to severe weakening of the Mexican state, which now had little authority and little ability to raise taxes or provide public services. Indeed, even though Santa Anna was president in Mexico, large parts of the country were not under his control, which enabled the annexation of Texas by the United States. In addition, as we just saw, the motivation behind Mexican Declaration of Independence was to protect the set of economic institutions developed during the colonial period, which had made Mexico. In the words of the great German explorer and geographer of Latin America, Alexander von Humboldt, like Cal State Humboldt or Humboldt Park. In the words of the great German explorer and geographer of Latin America, Alexander von Humboldt, the country of inequality. These institutions, by basing the society on exploitation of indigenous people and the creation of monopolies, blocked the economic incentives and initiatives of the great mass of population. As the United States began to experience the Industrial Revolution in the first half of the 19th century, Mexico got poorer. Okay, having an idea, starting a firm, and getting a loan. The Industrial Revolution started in England. Its first success was revolutionized production of cotton cloth using new machines powered by water wheels and later by steam engines. Mechanization of cotton production massively increased the productivity of workers in first textiles and subsequently other industries. The engine of technological breakthroughs throughout the economy was innovation, spearheaded by new entrepreneurs and businessmen eager to apply their new ideas. This first initial flowering soon spread across the North Atlantic to the United States. People saw the great economic opportunities available in adopting the new technologies developed in England. They were also inspired to develop their own inventions. We can try to understand the nature of these inventions by looking at who was granted patents. The patent system, which protects property rights in ideas, was systematized in the Statute of Monopolies legislated by the English Parliament in 1623. Partially as an attempt to stop the king from arbitrarily granting letters patent to whoever he wanted, effectively granting exclusive rights to undertake certain activities or businesses. The striking thing about the evidence on patenting in the United States is that people who were granted patents came from all sorts of backgrounds and all walks of life, not just the rich and elite. Many made fortunes based on their patents. Take Thomas Edison, the inventor of the phonogram and the light bulb and the founder of General Electric, still one of the world's largest companies. Edison was the last of 7 children. His father, Samuel Edison, followed many occupations, from spitting shingles for roofs to tailoring to keeping a tavern. Thomas had little formal schooling, but was homeschooled by his mother. Between 1820 and 1845, only 19% of patentees in the United States had parents who were professionals or were from recognizable major land-owning families. During the same period, 40% of those who took out patents had only primary schooling or less, just like Edison. Moreover, they often exploited their patent by starting a firm, again, like Edison, just as the United States in the 19th century was more democratic politically than almost any other nation in the world at the time. It was also more democratic than others when it came to innovation. This was critical in its path to becoming the most economically innovative nation in the world. If you were poor, with a good idea, it was one thing to take out a patent, which was not so expensive after all. It was another thing entirely to use that patent to make money. One way, of course, was to sell the patent to someone else. This is what Edison did early on to raise some capital. When he sold his quadruplex telegraph to Western Union for $10,000. Damn, $10,000 back then? That's what, like, I bet tech companies were like, I'm going to do a startup, and then we're just going to sell the company. But selling patents was a good idea only for someone like Edison, who had ideas faster than he could put them into practice. He had a world record 1,093 patents issued to him in the United States and 1,500 worldwide. The real way to make money from a patent was to start your own business. But to start a business, you need capital, and you need banks to lend the capital to you. Investors in the United States were once again fortunate. During the 19th century, there was a rapid expansion of financial intermediation and banking that was a crucial facilitator of the rapid growth of industrialization that the economy experienced. While in 1818 there were 338 banks in operation in the United States, with a total assets of 160 million, by 1914, less than 100 years later, there were 27,864 banks with total assets of 27.3 billion. Damn, that's crazy. That's so much. That's like exponential growth. Potential investors in the United States had ready access to capital to start their businesses. Moreover, the intense competition among banks and financial institutions in the United States meant that this capital was available at fairly low interest rates. Don't we know a thing or two about interest rates and lending money? The same was not true in Mexico. In fact, in 1910, the year in which the Mexican Revolution started, there were only 42 banks in Mexico, and 2 of those controlled 60% of total banking assets. Unlike in the United States, where competition was fierce, there was practically no competition among Mexican banks. This lack of competition meant that the banks were able to charge their customers very high interest rates and typically confined lending to the privileged and the already wealthy, who would then use their access to credit to increase their grip over the various sectors of the economy. The form that the Mexican banking industry took in the 19th and 20th centuries was a direct result of the post-independence political institutions of the country. The chaos of the Santa Anna era was followed by an abortive attempt by the French government under Emperor Napoleon II to create a colonial regime in Mexico under Emperor Maximilian between 1864 and 1867. The French were expelled, and a new constitution was written, but the government formed by Benito Juarez and after his death by Sebastián Lerdo de Tejada, was soon challenged by a young military named Porfirio Diaz. Oh my God. Y'all Mexicans should know this man. Diaz had been a victorious general in the war against the French and had developed aspirations of power. He formed a rebel army and in November 1876 defeated the army of the government in the Battle of Tecoac. Tecoac. In May of the next year, he had himself elected president. He went on to rule Mexico in a more or less unbroken and increasingly authoritarian fashion until his overthrow at the outbreak of revolution 34 years later. Like Iturbe and Santa Anna before him, Diaz started a life as a military commander. Such a career path into politics was certainly known in the United States. The first president of the United States, George Washington, was also a successful general in the War of Independence. Ulysses S. Grant, one of the victorious Union generals of the Civil War, became president in 1869. And Dwight D. Eisenhower, the supreme commander of the Allied forces in Europe during the Second World War, was president of the United States between 1953 and 1961. Unlike Iturbe, Santa Anna, and Diaz, however, none of these military men used force to get into power, nor did they use force to avoid having to relinquish power. They abided by the Constitution. Though Mexico had constitutions in the 19th century, they put few constraints on what Iturbe, Santa Anna, and Diaz could do. These men could be removed from power only the same way they had attained it, by the use of force. Diaz violated people's property rights, facilitating the expropriation of vast amounts of land, and he granted monopolies and favors to his supporters in all lines of business, including banking. There was nothing new about this behavior. This is exactly what the Spanish conquistadors had done and what Santa Anna did in their footsteps. The reason that the United States had a banking industry that was radically better for the economic prosperity of the country had nothing to do with differences in the motivation of those who owned the banks. Indeed, the profit motive, which underpinned the monopolistic nature of the banking industry in Mexico, was present in the United States too, but this profit motive was channeled differently because of the radically different U.S. institutions. The bankers faced different economic institutions that subjected them to much greater competition, and this was largely because the politicians who wrote the rules for the bankers faced very different incentives themselves, forged by different political institutions. Indeed, in the large 18th century, shortly after the Constitution of the United States came into operation, a banking system looking similar to that which subsequently dominated Mexico began to emerge. Politicians tried to set up state banking monopolies, which they could give to their friends and partners in exchange for part of the monopoly profits. The banks also quickly got into the business of lending money to the politicians who regulated them, just as in Mexico. But the situation was not sustainable in the United States because the politicians who attempted to create these banking monopolies, unlike their Mexican counterparts, were subject to elections and re-election. A way to hold their power accountable. Interesting. Creating banking monopolies and giving loans to politicians is good business for politicians if they can get away with it. It is not particularly good for the citizens, however. Unlike in Mexico, in the United States, the citizens could keep politicians in check and get rid of the ones who would use their offices to enrich themselves or create monopolies for their cronies. In consequence, the banking monopolies crumbled. The broad distribution of political rights in the United States, especially when compared to Mexico, guaranteed equal access to finance and loans. This, in turn, ensured that those with ideas and intentions could benefit from them. The world was changing in the 1870s and 80s. Latin America was no exception. The institutions that Porfirio Diaz established were not identical to those of Santa Anna or the Spanish colonial state. The world economy boomed in the second half of the 19th century as innovations in transportation such as the steamship and the railway led to huge expansion of international trade. This wave of globalization meant that resource-rich countries such as Mexico, or more appropriate, the elites in the countries could enrich themselves by exporting raw materials and natural resources to industrializing North America or Western Europe. Diaz and his cronies thus found themselves in a different and rapidly evolving world. They realized that Mexico had to change too, but this didn't mean uprooting the colonial institutions and replacing them with institutions similar to those in the United States. Instead, theirs was quote unquote path dependent change, leading only to the next stage of institutions that had already made much of Latin America poor and unequal. Globalization made the large open spaces of the Americas, its open frontiers, valuable. Often those frontiers were only mythically open since they were inhabited by indigenous people who were brutally disposed. All the same, the scramble for this newly valuable resource was one of the defining processes of the Americas in the second half of the 19th century. The sudden opening of this valuable frontier led not only parallel processes in the United States and Latin America, but to a further divergence, shaped by the existing institutional differences, especially those concerning who had access to the land. In the United States, a long series of legislative acts ranging from the Land Ordinance of 1785 to the Homestead Act of 1862 gave broad access to frontier lands. Though indigenous peoples had been sidelined, this created an egalitarian and economically dynamic frontier. Wow, who would have thought? The pioneers, communism. Sorry, that's dumb. But who would have thought, Pioneers. In most Latin American countries, however, the political institutions there created very different outcomes. Frontier lands were allocated to the politically powerful and those with wealth and contacts, making much people even more powerful. Diaz also started to dismantle many of the specific colonial institution legacies preventing international trade, which he anticipated could greatly enrich him and his supporters. His model, however, continued to be not the type of economic development he saw north of the Rio Grande, but that of Cortés, Pizarro, and de Toledo, where the elite would make huge fortunes while the rest were excluded. When the elite invested, the economy would grow a little, but such economic growth was always going to be disappointing. It also came at the expense of those lacking rights in this new order, such as the Yaqui people of Sonora and the hinterland of Nogales. Between 1900s and 1910, possibly 32,000 Yaqui were deported, essentially enslaved, and sent back to work in the Hequen plantations of the Yucatan. The fibers of the Henkin plant were valuable exports since they could be used to make rope and twine. Okay. The persistence into the 20th century of specific institutional imicable. Hold on, I need to look up another word. Immissal? I think that's how you say it. Well, Google will tell us right now. Inimical, tending to obstruct or harm. Okay, so harmful stuff. Okay, the persistence into the 20th century of the specific institutional pattern hindered the growth in Mexico and Latin America, as well as illustrated by the fact that, just as in the 19th century, the pattern generated economic stagnation and political instability. Civil wars and coups as groups struggled for the benefit of power, Diaz finally lost power to revolutionary forces in 1910. The Mexican Revolution was followed by others in Bolivia in 1952, Cuba in 1959, and Nicaragua in 1979. Meanwhile, sustained civil wars raged in Colombia, El Salvador, Guatemala, and Peru. Expropriations or the threat of expropriation of assets continued apace, with mass agrarian reforms or attempted reforms in Bolivia, Brazil, Chile, Colombia, Guatemala, Peru, and Venezuela. Revolution, expropriations, political instability came along with military governments and various types of dictatorships. Though there was also gradual drift towards greater political rights, it was only until the 1990s that most Latin American countries became democracies, and even then they remain mirrored in instability. This instability was accompanied by mass repression and murder. The 1991 National Commission for Truth and Reconciliation report in Chile determined that 2,279 persons were killed for political reasons during the Pinochet dictatorship between 1973 and 1990. Possibly 50,000 were imprisoned and tortured, and hundreds of thousands of people were fired from their jobs. The Guatemalan Commission for Historical Clarification report in 1999 identified a total of 42,000 named victims, though others have claimed that as many as 200,000 were murdered in Guatemala between 1962 and 1996. 70,000 during the regime of General Efrain Rios Montt, who was able to commit these crimes with such impunity that he could run for president in 2003. Fortunately, he did not win. The National Commission of Disappearances of Persons in Argentina put the number of people murdered by the military at 9,000 persons from 1976 to 1983. Although it noted that the actual number could be higher, estimates by human rights organizations usually place it at 30,000. Wow. The enduring implications of the organization of colonial society and society's institutional legacies shape the modern differences between the United States and Mexico, and thus the two parts of Nogales. The contrast between Bill Gates and Carlos Slim became the two richest men in the world. Warren Buffett is also a contender, illustrates the forces at work. The rise of Gates and Microsoft is well known, but Gates' status as the world's richest person and founder of one of the most technologically innovative companies did not stop the U.S. Department of Justice from filing civil actions against Microsoft Corporation on May 8, 1998, claiming that Microsoft abused monopoly power, particularly at issue with the way Microsoft had tied its web browser, Internet Explorer, to its Windows operating system. The government had been keeping an eye on Gates for quite some time, and as early as 1991, the Federal Trade Commission, the FTC, had launched an inquiry into whether Microsoft was abusing its monopoly on PC operating systems. In November 2001, Microsoft reached a deal with the Justice Department. It had its wings clipped. Even if the penalties were less than many demanded, it had its wings clipped, even if the penalties were less than many demanded. In Mexico, Carlos Slim did not make his money by innovation. Initially, he excelled in stock market deals and in buying and revamping unprofitable firms. His major coup was the acquisition of Telmex, the Mexican telecommunication monopoly. Holy shit. Gates, the STD guy? Yep, Bill Gates, the guy who didn't want his wife to get, Bill Gates, the guy who tried to give his wife STD medicine without her knowing because he didn't want her to find out that he caught an STD and that he was going to pass to her, because then she would have been like, how did you get this STD, Bill Gates? All right. Um, the Mexican telecommunication monopoly that was privatized by President Carlos Salinas in 1990. The government announced its intention to sell 51% of the voting stock, 24% of total stock in the company in September 1989, and received bids in November 1990. Even though Slim did not put in the highest bid, a consortium led to his Grupo Curso won the auction. Instead of paying for the shares right away, Slim managed to delay payment using the dividends of Telmix itself to pay for the stock, which was once a public monopoly, now became Slim's monopoly, and it was hugely profitable. The economic institutions that made Carlos Slim who he is are very different than those in the United States. If you're a Mexican entrepreneur, entry barriers will play a crucial role at every stage of your career. Those barriers include expensive licenses you have to obtain, red tape you have to cut through, politicians and incumbents who will stand in your way, and the difficulty of getting funding from a financial sector often in cahoots with the incumbents you're trying to compete against. These barriers can be either insurmountable, keeping you out of lucrative areas, or your greatest friend, keeping your competition at bay. The difference between the two scenarios, of course, whom you know and whom you can influence, and yes, whom you can bribe. Carlos Slim, a talented, ambitious man from a relatively modest background of Lebanese immigrants, had been the master at obtaining exclusive contracts. He managed to monopolize a lucrative telecommunication market in Mexico, and then to extend his reach to the rest of Latin America. There have been challenges to Slim's Telmex monopoly, but have not been successful. In 1996, Avantel, a long-distance phone provider, petitioned the Mexican Competition Commission to check whether Telmex had a dominant position in the telecommunication market. In 1997, the Commission declared that Telmex had substantial monopoly power with respect to local telephony, national long-distance call, and international long-distance call, among other things. But attempts by the regulatory authorities in Mexico to limit these monopolies have come to nothing. One reason is that Slim and Telmex can use what is known as a recurso de amparo, literally a pure appeal for protection. An amparo is an effective petition to argue that a particular law does not apply to you. The idea of an amparo dates back to the Mexican Constitution of 1857 and was originally intended as a safeguard of individual rights and freedoms. In the hands of Telmex and other Mexican monopolies, however, it has become a formidable tool for cementing monopoly power. Rather than protecting people's rights, the amparo provides a loophole in equality before the law. Slim, Carlos Slim, but I don't think he was slim. Maybe he was a little Slim Shady. Slim has made his money in the Mexican economy in large part thanks to his political connections. When he has ventured into the United States, he had not been successful. In 1999, his Grupo Curso brought the computer retailer CompUSA. At the time, CompUSA had given a franchise to a firm called COC Services to sell its merchandise in Mexico. Slim immediately violated this contract with the intention of setting up his own chain of stores, without any competition from COC. But COC sued CompUSA in a Dallas court. There are no amperos in Dallas, so Slim lost and was fined $454 million. The lawyer for COC, Mark Werner, noted afterward that the message of this verdict is that the global economy, firms have to respect the rules of the United States if they want to come here. When Slim was subjected to the institutions of the United States, his usual tactics for making money did not work. Wow. Wow. Isn't that interesting? Isn't that interesting that, Bill Gates was not able to create a monopoly in the 90s because the US government was like, nah, we were very familiar with monopolies and we're not going to allow that. But now today, we're just like, Mark Zuckerberg, you want to buy Snapchat because they're your competition and Snapchat is taking away business from you, Facebook or Meta, whatever the frick it's called. That means that you can buy Snapchat. Like, man, how far America has fallen, bro. Man. Bashan in a box, you went to take a nap? Hilarious. I'm glad you took a nap, though. I'm glad you're done with your nap because we're still on chapter 1 of the book. Yeah, we just allow the monopolies. We don't care no more, and it's gonna get worse with AI. I guarantee it. Okay. We live in an unequal world. The difference among nations are similar to those between the two parts of Nogales, just on a larger scale. In rich countries, individuals are healthier, live longer, and are much better educated. They also have access to a range of amenities and options in life, from vacations to career paths, that people in poor countries can only dream of. People in rich countries also drive on roads without potholes and enjoy toilets, electricity, and running water in their houses. They also typically have governments that do not arbitrarily arrest or harass them. Until now. Bashonen said, dude, all these readings get me sleepy. Okay. Well. Okay. Yeah, so it's crazy. Yeah. Okay. On the contrary, the government provides services including education, healthcare, roads, and law and order. Notable, too, is the fact that the citizens vote in elections and have some voice in the political direction their countries take. The great difference in the world inequality are evident to everyone, even to those in poor countries, though many lack access to television or the internet. It is the perception and reality of these differences that drive people to cross the Rio Grande or the Mediterranean Sea illegally to have the chance to experience rich country living standards and opportunities. This inequality doesn't just have consequences for the lives of individual people in poor countries, it also causes grievances and resentment with huge political consequences in the United States and elsewhere. Understanding why these differences exist and what causes them is our focus of this book. Developing such an understanding is not just an end itself, but also a first step towards generating better ideas about how to improve the lives of billions who still live in poverty. The disparity on two sides of the fence in Nogales is just the tip of the iceberg. As in the rest of northern Mexico, which benefits from trade with the United States, even if it is not all legal, the residents of Nogales are more prosperous than other Mexicans, whose average annual household income is around $5,000. This greater relative prosperity of Nogales Sonora comes from maquiladora manufacturing plants centered in industrial parks, the first of which was started by Richard Campbell Jr., a Californian basket manufacturer. The first tenant was Coin Art, a musical instrument company owned by Richard Bose, owner of the Artley Flute and Saxophone Company in Nogales, Arizona. CoinArt was following Memorex. Oh yeah, Memorex makes they used to make like USB sticks and other memory stuff. Okay. Ugh. Oh yeah, tapes too, right? Computer wiring, Advent hospital clothing, Grant sunglasses, Chamberlain manufacture of garage door openers for Sears, and Samsonite suitcases. Significantly are all US based businesses and businessmen using US capital and know how. The greater prosperity of Nogales, Sonora, relative to the rest of Mexico, therefore comes from outside. Deviate said the US is a rich country, but it doesn't seem like one. Yeah, because the rich people here just keep squeezing out money out of us. Okay. The difference between the United States are in turn small compared to those across the entire globe. The average citizen of the United States is 7 times as prosperous as the average Mexican and more than 10 times as the resident of Peru or Central America. She is about 20 times as prosperous as the average inhabitant of sub-Saharan Africa and almost 40 times as those living in the poorest African countries such as Mali, Ethiopia, and Sierra Leone. And it is not just the United States. There is a small but growing group of rich countries, mostly in Europe and North America, joined by Australia, Japan, New Zealand, Singapore, South Korea, and Taiwan, whose citizens enjoy very different lives from those of inhabitants of the rest of the globe. The reason that Nogales, Arizona is much richer than Nogales, Sonora is simple. It's because the very different institutions on the two sides of the border, which create very different incentives for the inhabitants of Nogales, Arizona versus Nogales, Sonora, the United States is also far richer today than either Mexico or Peru because of the way institutions, both economic and political, shape incentives of businesses, individuals, and politicians. Each society functions with a set of economic and political rules created and enforced by the state and the citizens collectively. Economic institutions shape economic incentives. The incentives to become educated, to save and invest, to innovate and adopt new technologies, and so on. It is the political process that determines what economic institutions people live under. And it is the political institutions that determine how this process works. For example, it is the political institutions of a nation that determines the ability of citizens to control politicians and influence how they behave. This in turn determines whether politicians are agents of the citizen, albeit imperfect, or are able to abuse the power entrusted to them, or that they have usurped to amass their own fortunes and to pursue their own agendas. One's detrimental to those of citizens. Political institutions include, but are not limited to, written constitutions and to whether the society is a democracy. They include the power and capacity of the state to regulate and govern society. It is also necessary to consider more broadly the factors that determine how political power is distributed in society, particularly the ability of different groups to act collectively to pursue their objectives or to stop other people from pursuing theirs. So it's like political action committees. As institutions influence behavior and incentives in real life, they forge the success or failure of nations. Individual talent matters at entry levels of society, but even that needs an institutional framework to transform it into a positive force. Bill Gates, like any other legendary figure in the information technology industry, such as Paul Allen, Steve Ballmer, Steve Jobs, Larry Page, Sergey Brin, and Jeff Bezos, had immense talent and ambition, but he ultimately responded to incentives. The schooling system in the United States enabled Gates and others like him to acquire a unique set of skills to complement their talents. The economic institution in the United States enabled these men to start companies with ease without facing insurmountable barriers. Those institutions also made financing their projects feasible. The U.S. labor market enabled them to hire qualified personnel and the relatively competitive market environment enabled them to expand their companies and market their products. These entrepreneurs were confident from the beginning, and their dream projects could be implemented. They trusted the institutions and the rule of law that these generated, and they did not worry about the security of property rights. Finally, their political institutions ensured stability and continuity. For one thing, they made sure that there was no risk of a dictator taking power and changing the rules of the game, expropriating their wealth, imprisoning them, maybe not yet, or threatening their lives and their livelihoods. They also made sure that no particular interest in society could warp the government in an economically disastrous direction, because political power was both limited and distributed sufficiently broadly that the set of economic institutions that created the incentives for prosperity could emerge. No, Deviate, you're right. You're right. And I'm going to address this point right now. So, yes, Bill Gates, Jeff Bezos, whatever other, people that had the ability to go to Harvard or whatever Ivy League school came from money, right? But it would be stupid of me, a person who loves artistic creation, to say that these men did not actually have talent. They have talent. They have talent. They have talent in the same way that I have talent. But they have a leg up over me. And that is the little bit of more money that their parents had than compared to my money. That's what it is. Talent can take you far. But man, when you have the resources, like I would say it's like the difference between playing like Little League and then like travel ball, right? Little League is just for funsies. Travel ball is like for building skill, right? And that's what I would say. Although I don't agree with how Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos and especially all the new tech billionaires have acquired their wealth, I would be stupid of me to not say that they don't have some talent. They do have some talent. They just didn't get to where they were exclusively on their talent. They got to where they were with daddy's money. With daddy's money and with other people like, these venture capitalists were like, yeah, I'm going to do that. They Deviate says they have no soul. No, yeah. They have like still the 7 deadly sins, right? They may they may have a soul, but they just don't care about keeping the health of their soul. They care about what other people think about them. That's why Bill Gates made himself the most richest man in the world, or marketed himself as the most richest man in the world. If he didn't want to, oh crap, I think the stream dropped. Yeah. Stream is kind of, we're kind of effing a little bit. It might be the rain. But anyways, yeah. There's It would be stupid of me, another person, to be like, yeah, all these men, even the fucking Cortez and all of those people, it would be stupid to say that they didn't know what they were doing or they weren't good at what they were doing. They were. They knew what they were doing. Nice. I'm glad you can still hear Deviate. Maybe the picture's just busted. But they knew what they were doing. They were good at their jobs, just like the Nazis, you know? The Nazis were not, they were monsters, but, you know, like they had what they did. They did what they figured out how to do what they wanted to do down to a science. And that's the same thing with these financial firms. You know, their main goal is to make money. So, yeah. Let's finish this. I think we just have like 2 more pages. And then we can move on to the next thing. The institution influence behavior and incentives in real life. They forge the success or failure of nations. Individual talent matters at entry level of society, but even that needs an institutional framework to transform it into a positive force. Bill Gates, like other legendary figures in the information technology industry. Oh, we already read that. Whoops. Okay, so we're almost done with this chapter. Yeah, it's because there's too many people home using the internet. So maybe we might end the stream instead of, because what I want to do next is going to bandwidth. So maybe after we finish reading this, we'll say our goodbyes and come back and to react to the 28 election stuff when the internet isn't bad. Okay. This book will show you that while economic institutions are crucial for determining whether the country is poor or prosperous, it is politics and political institutions that determine what economic institutions a country has. Ultimately, the good economic institutions of the United States resulted from the political institutions that gradually emerged after 1619. Our theory for world inequality shows how political and economic institutions interact in causing poverty or prosperity, and how different parts of the world end up with such different sets of institutions. Our brief review of the history of the Americas began to give a sense of the forces that shape political and economic institutions. Different patterns of institutions today are deeply rooted in the past because once society gets organized in a particular way, this tends to persist. We'll show that this fact comes from the way that political and economic institutions interact. The persistence and the forces that create it is also explained why it is so difficult to remove world inequality and to make poor countries prosperous. Through institutions, are the key in the differences between the two Nogales's and between Mexico and the United States. That doesn't mean there will be a consensus in Mexico to change institutions. Necessity for society to develop or to adopt the institutions that are best for economic growth or for the welfare of its citizens, because other institutions may be even better for those who control politics and political institutions. The powerful and the rest of the society will often disagree about which set of institutions should remain in place and which ones should be changed. Carlos Slim would not have been happy to see his political connections disappear and the entry barriers protecting his businesses fizzle, no matter that the entry of new businesses would enrich millions of Mexicans. Because there is no such consensus, what rules society ends up with it's determined by politics, who has power, and how this power can be exercised. Carlos Slim had the power to get what he wants. Bill Gates' power is far more limited. That's why our theory is not just about economics, but also politics. It is about the effects of institutions on the success and failure of nations. Thus, the economics of poverty and prosperity It is also about how institutions are determined and change over time, and how they fail to change even when they create poverty and misery for millions, thus, the politics of poverty and prosperity. Damn, we did it. We finished chapter 1. Oh my god, that was good. That took 3 hours. Took almost 3 hours. Yeah. Oh, Bishon in a box. Yeah, I know. We won't stream when there's everyone in the neighborhood is home using the internet. Because, like, even kids are home from school right now, too. Okay. All right. Yeah, I see that I'm still dropping frames. So, let's just end it here. We will go over the Hassan stuff and the Gavin Newsom stuff another day. But I'm so happy that we got to read the first chapter of this book because, oh my God, was it not amazing? Was it not amazing going through the how Latin America developed versus North America? You know, it's crazy. Economics and politics are so intertwined and they affect each other. DV8 said, "Who needs school?" Yeah, well, welcome to my YouTube class. Today we're talking about no. But yeah, no. Education is everywhere you can find it. You just need to know what places to look and what resources to find. So, okay. Here. We'll play a little bit lo-fi house on the outro. Thank you for joining me, everyone. It's been a pleasure. Happy President's Day. We will talk more about presidents later for sure, because that's what democracy is all about. It's about picking an executive and holding them accountable. So, everyone have a good rest of your day. Enjoy your Monday, President's Day. Thank you for joining me over the past 3 hours. Yeah, no, I'm ending it right now, but shown in a box. I'm sorry. Just because this is bad internet still. We're like dropping 36% of the frames right now, so... And like I said, I want to watch a video, a couple of videos, but not with this internet. So, okay, peace out, everyone. Have a good rest of your night. This has been a pleasure. My name's Angelina Tucci. Thank you for joining me. Yeah, everyone take care. Drop some hearts in the chat.
Yes.